Welcome to webinar 11. Today's webinar is going to be focused on engaging and connecting students. I'll be actually speaking today along with Neil, and I'm going to get us started off. The agenda today is going to be talking mainly about social presence, socializing, engaging and motivating students, connecting online students with on-campus students. We'll also be talking about icebreaker activities for Q1 and Q2. The use of portfolios and virtual worlds. So we've got a lot to cover, but part of the reason why we have so many topics here is because in this engagement and motivating students, there's different keywords. So you can always look for different activities based on those keywords. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. And I wanted to say something about Du Normal, more as a blooper, actually, but something that I realized after having lived here for a year as an American. I found that, that former colleagues of mine were reaching out in what felt very unconventional ways after having lived here for a year. And I found that, they would reach out to me like with Facebook Messenger or Skype, and even attempt to call me. And after being here for a year, it felt like an invasion of privacy. But I realized before I had considered it normal. And so I put this here as a Du Normal because students come from all aspects, and they may not know what is normal in your culture. So sometimes part of what you do in a course with that socialization and the engaging students is actually teaching them what is normal, so that they can have effectively a good experience and interact well with the others who are in that normal setting for them. And so part of setting the scene is realizing that not every student comes with the same background, which means that they may not all have the same educational background considerations. They may have some interruptions in formal education. They may be older than some of the other people in the class. They may be actually younger. Then you have the disability considerations, what they might have, and how that might affect how they socialize in your classroom. And also the status considerations. Domestic violence and health issues, mental health issues, can affect how they would interact. For example, a survivor of a domestic violence might get overwhelmed and overshare something, the same with someone in a mental health situation, and they may reach out in communicating in a different way. But that's actually part of their journey in their career. The same for anyone else in the education considerations. So something that I noticed in the current situation in our current times is you may have noticed peers in other countries talk about personal struggles, perhaps even on Twitter, and you see others encourage them. And that's not something that you would normally see. However, people with different backgrounds have that same experience normally. So what I did see and notice more specifically is in social media, currently we're all in the same boat of experiencing the current times. And so we are all in it together, but some of these people have those things normally. And so the socialization for them is really important because maybe it is the best place for them. And so that's why I like to look at basically, how did you as an instructor get to be in your degree program? What motivated you to be in your degree? What is the one thing that one instructor perhaps did or said that motivated you and that you can always remember and look back on? Because essentially, you are successful. You've got a career yourself as a lecturer. And so you've made it to the end of the tunnel, that light at the end. But there were people along that way that helped light your path towards that direction and point you in those ways. So think about what they did that you will always remember and think about. And I'm sorry, but I think someone has their microphone on. I'm not quite certain who that is. If you can just double check your microphone and make sure it's muted if you need to. So if you do want to share out something, you can certainly do that in the public chat. But it's something that, at least for right now, just think about it on your own. And you can even close your eyes and think about that, about what one instructor has done for you that helped you go along in your career. And something that basically for your career path and for your students' career path, sometimes they don't exactly see what's at the end of the tunnel. They see where they want to be, but they don't fully see what their full end goal. What does that mean for them? What does that mean for their family? However, on their path, they're creating a paradise, essentially. So this is my little garden, and it's something that like I painted and kind of adjusted. But I always remember now where I'm at now versus where I was in my past in my career as a student. Yes, that's true, Robert. It is me. So this is my little garden, and I kind of look at this as my little paradise that I've created along the way, based on other people that helped me get to where I'm at, essentially. Other people have motivated me to stay in my career or advance my career, and that's what's kind of something that's kind of nice to think about is what are you doing for your students, and where would you see them in 10 years? Some of the things that you see for engaging and motivating students is essentially sparking interest, getting them interested in your field, in your career path, getting the students to want to participate in the activities that are sometimes required, and any activity in general. Maintaining their motivation within the course, within the activities, and looking at how to give them rewards or encourage them to give their own rewards. Sometimes as a student, you have to come up with your own reward system. So for me, I always looked at if I finished all my homework, then I would, at the end of the weekend, I would go to the mountains for a hike. So maybe if your students seem to be lacking some motivation, you can make suggestions of some things that you have done to help you achieve your end goal of your master's, your PhD, and even your bachelor's. Another fun thing is kind of hiding some content that's a bonus in the online course space, essentially, and letting them discover it on their own and talk about it to others, saying, did you find this one really neat video that was posted online that really is newest in the field, that type of thing. It's fun when they can find those elements and talk about it with each other. And if they don't find the hidden content, then you can always let them know that something is hidden and they have to do something to find it. Then adding elements of the fun, essentially, is looking inside of your activities. What can you build inside of a current activity to make it fun, or change the wording of the instructions to make it more interesting? And then think about when you think of something that's fun, what do you consider fun and why is it fun? And then the challenges. In your career path, sometimes you even put challenges in front of yourself to achieve. So in your class, is there something like that that you can do? Can you set up a challenge that your students can achieve at the end of the semester? And connecting with the campus and online courses, something that I've done for a while is connecting courses since about like 2009. And part of my reason was I had been on a study abroad, and it was like my second study abroad. And I realized that not everyone had that opportunity, but many people wanted to interact with other students in other countries. And so I helped courses connect virtually. And so there would be a group in Mexico, Japan, Peru. And in the end, I wound up with many other countries joining on. And I had several connect all at the same time so they could experience a multicultural experience of the different countries and talk. And so some of the things that I'm talking about today is what I've learned by connecting people from different cultures, and how long it took them to warm up to interacting, how long it took them to actually collaborate and build something together, and just the general complications and social norms that I noticed. One of them being one student asking another student to give them a tour of their whole house, including their bedroom, which was uncomfortable for the person on the other side, for clear reasons, because there was a gender difference, and for that country, it was very important. So some of the things that I mention is some things that you can do in your own classroom to help people learn to respect different cultures. Because, for example, I think we've heard in some of the news that some of our freshmen, if they are international, may not be physically on campus. They may even still be in their home country. And if that's the case, they may not know or experience all the social norms, and they may find it more directly inside of your classroom, essentially. So you're helping them to better understand what are the norms for the Dutch culture. Some of the results of connecting courses and connecting those groups of students are things that I would say are going to be the same for even the students who say we open only partially for students and we allow only 10% or 50% of the class to be physically on campus in the same classroom, and the rest have to be home. And let's say that you still want them to bond and connect and do their exercises together, so one group doesn't feel like they've gained more than the other. I think these are going to be the same types of situations. What the students on both sides will always learn is how to actually interact in a virtual setting and how they do that remote work. And they may find, yes, it may take more emails. It takes time to figure out what time. Sometimes there's time differences, and their actual schedule might be different. So having back-to-back virtual meetings with different classes may be difficult for them, but they have to figure those things out along the way. On the groups of people, they tend to talk about the differences and similarities that they have as well, even if they're from the same culture. What's also interesting to note is they find out what is actually achievable in that virtual teamwork if they are supposed to create a document together. So then they will discover that maybe it was harder to write 4 pages, but it was easier to do the presentation, or it was easier to do 2 pages of a document. And then they will talk about their actual teamwork. The other aspects they'll actually talk about too is what they learn from their peer. And this can be many things. It can be something that is clarifying career goals as they share the differences and similarities. They may find other options inside of their career based on conversations with their peers. Another thing that I've noticed when I do those connecting the students virtually is that it tends to take about 3 weeks for the students to really warm up and connect with each other. And after 3 weeks, they actually ask each other for social media, and they attempt to expand their actual networks. But up until then, it's kind of like the concept of if you're on a bus and you sit next to a stranger, you don't immediately talk to them about everything in your life or what's going on, what you're doing in your career path, and what you're doing even for that day. But if you see that same person repeatedly, say for 2 to 3 weeks on the bus every day on the same time that you are, and you happen to always sit next to each other or nearby, you probably will warm up and actually have more conversations. And I see we have a question about how big would you make those connecting groups? It depends. So if you're asking them to do collaboration together, you may do a group of 2 to 4. You may do a larger group. But realize the larger the group, the less effort the student has to put into that group work. So it really depends on what activity you're actually doing. But overall, as far as how many students have been connected in the same space, I had 6 courses from different countries connecting, and then we paired up. So each group had one person from a different country. So they had the experience and could see how each other might interact. So it was a little bit difficult to get everyone in the same space and set up all the pairs. So it actually took about 1 week to do all that pairing up. before they actually started doing something. But that's kind of like the typical. But again, this depends on your situation. So if you ever have questions, we can always talk about more about your specific situation and what makes the most sense. So part of that conversation about connecting courses or students basically being online and experiencing another location is connected to the virtual mobility. And I have some quotes up here specifically on virtual mobility and how it can complement or substitute physical mobility. And in our current situation, that's kind of where many of our international students are. If they can't make it here, they have to be in that virtual mobility space, essentially. But some of our students, even here in the Netherlands, may be in different cities that are too far to travel on a realistic daily base, and their situation may be that they will be only in a virtual setting, possibly in September. So that's why I include this here. And I have a question over here. What kind of educational work forms are best to ensure the collaboration or get it going assignments? And if some students are on campus and online at the same time? That's a great question. And I'm actually going to hold on to that and talk a little bit more on some of the next things, because there's many ways that we can do that. And hopefully I address that on some of the things, but if not, I'm going to come back to your question too. Right now, I want you to find an object in your room where you're sitting and find something that speaks to you about your career. In the chat, post what that item is. So if you can post something that you grabbed in your room that speaks to you about your career or your career path and how you got to where you're at. Part of the thing is when you first get started, you really want to set up these icebreaker activities. What I just asked is a possible icebreaker activity because it helps them as a student to connect with an object that's physical in the room, even though they can't be there, but it also personalizes their experience. So it gives them a personality and other people can connect with that. Because Neil, for example, says he's got a video game. I'm curious to know which video game because I like games. But that would be something that maybe speaks out to me. Someone else may be interested in something else. And then that helps pair up who might be interested in working together. And it helps give them that sensation of being able to interact even in a virtual setting and finding those connections. Because the difficulty here for students is that on campus, they generally showed up to the same room and they sat and waited together. And during that time, they also got to talk to each other, maybe connect. They could see each other's things on their desks, their books, or other things that they may have, maybe a t-shirt that says a music thing. But they can connect and they can see who they might want to sit next to and who they want to chat next to. And that might change each week. Also, by the end of the class, when they get up to leave, they might walk out together because they might go to the same class. What's missing in the online world is they don't have any space like that. So if we pretend that they don't need that space, we actually might hurt them in the sense that they don't have that bonding of finding someone that they want to work with or things like that. So my object, by the way, is a leather-bound little diary book. And it's something that I like to do for my goals. So I set goals and then I write about the goals that I am trying to achieve. So it can be something that maybe someone else is a writer and also has that. Maybe they just like to travel and they also have like a travel diary book that they take with them. But other activities for icebreakers are specifically asking them, what motivates you to be in this program? Why are you here? Maybe you ask them, what inventor or founder in the field really motivated you to pick this career path? And then they can talk about that in their introduction. You can ask them to show a picture or an image, maybe of their outdoor or a location in their city, especially if you know you have students in different cities. That could be nice because then they can share other locations, even though travel is limited. You can ask them to build a class song list together where they all provide their favorite song. So then that is another way that they can connect. A virtual scavenger hunt is something that I like to do, especially if it's on a younger crowd, on learners. I can ask them, to find different things within the course. I can ask them also to find different things on the campus map or on the city of where the campus is. Currently, I know there are some different travel things that we have restriction-wise, but something to be similar on the scavenger hunt, because you see this happen in a lot of like a freshman orientation. They might do a scavenger hunt in groups. You can ask them to do something where individually they do their scavenger hunt and they can go into Delft here and travel to different places and pick up something or take a picture next to something, or visit a museum and take a picture, or something similar, where they all then have the same similar picture, but something slightly different that they do. And then they feel that connection of at least being in that same space, even though they can't sit next to each other in a regular classroom. There's also something similar, like the games of Pokemon, where when you travel, you can go find something based on your phone, essentially. And you can build something similar where when they go to a certain tree or they go to a certain building on campus or somewhere in Delft or maybe the train station, that they essentially find a digital treasure that either you put there or you can ask the students to put something. And that's something much more complicated, I think, than just asking them to post a picture up in a scavenger hunt type thing where they have to find something like the best engineering design that they can find in Delft or the best architectural spot. Whatever your degree or your course is really focused on, you can do something like that to spark their interest and help them actually see each other. Because part of online education is they won't see each other as much. But if you ask them to post a picture up, it helps them feel more of a sense of community, essentially. Now, next question. Superheroes and legends. What superhero or legend do you identify with and why? Think about it and then post your answer in the chat. Batman, Neil. Okay, that was obvious. Nice. Mine, I usually reference is Xena, because she has this, warrior thing going, and I do backpack camping up in the Rocky Mountains, so it kind of makes you feel like a warrior. But then I also, Xena is also a princess, and I like to wear like sparkly heels every once in a while too. So that's my legend, essentially, that I identify with. Now, asking your students something like that also gets them talking about it and considering why. And then you have a better understanding of their character in their classroom setting, what type of thing they might do. What type of group work would you expect from Batman, for example? That type of thing, when they're partnering up, you can then mix match your superhero groups, essentially. And you know who might be more of an overachiever or more of a go-getter, or who is more of a scholarly figure or something like that. Yeah, the group work with Batman sounds awesome, Danica. So socializing, you'll notice that part of what students miss sometimes is the socialization of a class, especially online. And that's actually what usually helps motivate people in a class. They can laugh together. The hardest thing about online education is, when do you actually laugh in a course online? It's kind of hard. And I'm not suggesting that you go add jokes to your course. I'm suggesting that you look at the course and see, is there anything in my course right now that enables students to actually socialize? One area you can do is adding a cafe that has nothing to do with the rest of the course and putting it at the beginning. And saying, this is your space to own it as a class, socialize however you want. You can put in jokes, you can talk about achievements, you can talk about successes, or anything that you want. I found that's where people will say something like, my niece was just born, here's the picture, I'm an uncle. And you weren't expecting it, and then all of a sudden other students are posting and saying, oh, that's a cute baby. They're socializing in a different way. Then you see dog pictures, cat pictures, and maybe even some jokes. But if you let them have their space, they may do something that actually helps them bond and continue on in the actual course. And maybe even they post jokes about the career, which is also kind of helping in some ways too, because it lightens the seriousness sometimes and makes it feel fun as they go along. So if you build it, they will come. I'm sure we've heard that. But if you don't build it, they'll build it without you. And this is my experience in, if you don't create the spaces for them, they generally will create it and not invite you. And then you find out about a space that they have. And then you wonder, should I have done that? Or at least know what's going on inside of that space. So it's up to you. But again, just like if they're going to have a borrel after the end of each month or something like that, here in the Netherlands, I might expect that the professor or lecturer knows about it. In the US, they would not. But that is a difference in socializing and cultures. Social presence. Do you ever talk to your student about their actual social presence? Because that's very much different than when they sit in a classroom and act professionally. They're used to presenting themselves in person, perhaps. But in a social aspect online, they may not be. So helping them to create an image and picking an image. What should it look like? Maybe more like the LinkedIn example, instead of a beach scene or something like that. They're talking about how to do the profile picture so that it actually shows their face in a professional way, instead of the mountain scene and you can barely see if that's them. The tone of their writing or their images, so that they express themselves in whatever setting or whatever place that they're getting used to. It's nice for them in this education space to do that so they can learn and be ready for something like a LinkedIn or something like that. Having avatars too is another option. Asking them to build an avatar and show that would be nice. And actually talking to them about who is your potential audience that might be looking at your social presence, and what does that mean for you? What do you want your audience to feel or see when they actually look at your presence in an online setting? And I think there was a question from Pim: a social cafe for an online workshop feels a bit much. What would you consider an alternative for something like that in a 4-hour workshop? Maybe the way of dividing groups. Yeah, in a 4-hour workshop, you're probably not going to need a social cafe, but you can look at instead adding some of the socialization inside of the discussion. So in an introduce yourself, you might add 1 or 2 questions that are focused on socializing. And then later on in the other modules, you may ask them something that personalizes their career or their reason for being in that workshop, so that they feel a personal connection in some way. Grateful. What are you grateful for in your profession or career? Take a minute to think about that and add it to the chat. What are you actually thankful for? And the reason why I ask this, it's a great question for your students, because they're beginning to be in a career, or they're just starting out to actually be in that career path. So they may not see it. They would love to hear what you're grateful for. It helps you see where they're at, and they can actually talk about different things, because sometimes students forget or don't even think about the good side and the fun things and the things that are benefiting them already in their career. That can be a big motivator. So that's a really good question, I think, too, to ask your students, maybe even around the challenging parts of the course, is just asking them in a certain area. So I love the questions or the statements coming in about the support, praise from unexpected places, opportunities, autonomy to pursue interests, thankful for the people that took you seriously, and great mentors. I know I'm skipping a few of these because they're coming in much faster too. Support from families and mentoring colleagues, the opportunity given to me due to riskful activities. I think too, the ability to fail, but be able to redo something is also something that people can be grateful for. That's similar to the riskful activities, and having the freedom. I think for me, I would say I'm very grateful for the opportunities that I have in my profession, and I do feel a lot more freedom. So I love seeing that as a response as well. Portfolios. Your students want a job at the end of their career path. So even in your course, if it's not focused on the program, what could you do inside of it to help them think about their current resume, their published work that they've already maybe have out there that they could showcase, their design work or blueprints that they could share, a gallery of images or a gallery of work in some way, their contact info, and also what volunteer work they do. The thing is a lot of places you don't have the opportunity to talk about your volunteer work. So having an online website that is actually your portfolio or your CV helps. But again, this depends on the career and it depends on the person. This is building a social presence for that student. But the reason why I mention this too is even if your course doesn't have any focus on it, it may be a good question to ask them sometime in the course. When was the last time you updated your resume? Because you'll find that they usually only update a resume when they're looking for a job, which could be several years away from when they do the achievements. So it's nice to do it at least maybe every few years or even every year for some of these students so that they can improve their chances in an internship or their initial first job after they graduate. And then here's an email if you have immediate questions, but you can also feel free to email Neil or I with any other questions that you might have. Thanks for joining us today.
Super, thanks, Zena. Yeah, so just to kind of talk a little bit about games, I'm Neil, I'm working at TLS, a colleague